We're live. Welcome to this month's February's Liberalism in Practice panel discussion. We are talking about depoliticizing the classroom, the racialist agendas. We did this in Sacramento in October, and it went so well that I'm kind of reintroducing these conversations here at ILV. We are down one man, our friend Dumasani Washington. But we have Wingfield Twyman Jr., my friend, an attorney, and author, my co-author even, who is going to moderate the panel. We have Eric Smith, who is the co-founder of Free Black Thought, a recovering academic. Is that fair to say, Eric?
Very much, yes.
A senior researcher with the Cato Institute. And we have Michael David Cobb Bowen, who is also the co-founder of Free Black Thought. And he is a writer. You can find Michael, is it MDC Bowen for your Substack?
Yes.
Stoic writer, some great work there. So with that introduction, I'm Jennifer Richmond, the director of the Institute for Liberal Values. I'm going to kind of be the peanut gallery today and maybe jump in with a few questions, but also be moderating our questions from online. Keep in mind, if you're watching on IL Value or Institute of Liberal Values X or YouTube, that's where you can, as the audience, type in any of your questions and we'll work to get to them as it fits into the schedule. So with no further ado, then, Wink, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jennifer, for that nice introduction. And thank you, Eric and Michael as well, for agreeing to talk with us for the next hour or so about this topic of racialist agendas in the classroom. You know, as Jen mentioned, we all got together and talked about this back in October in Sacramento. And today it feels like a different timeline compared to October in Sacramento. So let's discuss. I began our discussion back in October with this quote from Henry A. Thoreau: "Education is never neutral. It is always a political act." And those words were written on October 4th, 2024 by Professor Henry A. Thoreau, who's been associated with the critical race theory ideology in classrooms. So my question to get us going today is, are we living in a post-diversity, equity, and inclusion world? Are we currently in a post-DEI world or not? And first, I'll have Eric take a swing at that, and then Michael.
We are not in a post-DEI world, mainly because even the executive orders that are coming out are directed towards DEI departments, not towards faculty. Right? So we still have this stuff going on in the classroom, which is fine. I'm all about academic freedom, but when you start compelling students to believe a certain worldview, that's different. And I know from people telling me things that is happening here and there. It's great to talk about, say, critical race theory or critical social justice or something like that as a theory and discuss it, the pros, the cons, and things like that. But to say this is the way we should see the world, and if you don't, there's something wrong with you, I'm paraphrasing. Right. That's a little different. So it's not post-DEI just yet. Now, has DEI had its Waterloo moment? I think so. I think, post-DEI is on its way. It's not here yet.
Okay. Michael, chime in.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when I look at history, it's kind of like they say, the winners get to tell the story. And war becomes the excuse for everything. This is why we are what we are now. And we've had a culture war, and a new side won. And so a lot of things are going to get pinned on the new administration, whether or not they're intended. So I think some people are going to double down on what they believed in. Everybody pretends that they're going to run off to Canada, but I don't think that's going to happen. And I think the devil is still in the details. Some people are going to find a new rhetorical strategy for talking about the same thing. Some people are going to say, oh, well, I was never really with that. So, And then some people, I think, have had a genuine state of a change of mind in terms of their willingness to just get along and fit along. So there's a lot of dust is still in the air, and we'll see who's holding the football in a couple months.
Good point. Good point. When we look at that quote I began with, education is never neutral. It is always a political act. Are those words more true or less true since October in Sacramento? Eric, take a swing at that.
Well, Giroux and his friends have been saying that for quite some time. Giroux is the person who kind of ushered in Paulo Freire and his work into academia and K through 12 to an extent as well. All that said, I think the statement is flirting with banality. Really, it's okay. There's politics in the classroom. Great. How are you defining this? Now, there's definitely ideology in the classroom. And if you want to call classical liberalism a political stance, then it's in the classroom in that sense, right? That's why we have a liberal arts education, right? We're well-rounded people, breadth and depth, right? Critical thinking, all these things go into a liberal arts education, just those things and a lot more actually, but that's a liberal arts education. And technically, if you see Enlightenment / classical liberal values as a political stance, then yes, politics are in the classroom. But what Giroux is doing is different. Giroux once said in an interview, in a video, teachers should try to establish the world they want to see in their students, right? Like as if it's all about the teacher, and here's the world I want, and I'm going to mold you into that. He thinks that's totally fine.
You're going to become little agents of my worldview.
Right.
He thinks that's fine. And I have some reservations about that. I'm also mad at him because I asked him a question when I was a grad student, and he made me look stupid.
People have long memories. I appreciate that.
Yep. I can hold a grudge.
Michael?
I've been thinking about the difference between politics and ideology. And I think when I reviewed what we talked about, I'm taking Eric's point more, which is that, you have to get to the core of the ideology. You have to get to the core of the animating values. I think the problem in the classroom now is that it is partisan politics, the kind which says, you're not my friend anymore because you disagreed with me. But the root cause of that is I am trying to implement this Enlightenment liberalism ideology or these first principles. And then, I hope after this moment, people are going to be more honest about their ideology. And then we can have a real discussion about their ideology. If they just say, really, I really believe in critical race theory. That's the way I want to shape my view of the world. And DEI should do that. Because everybody who comes to DEI, whatever it is, has their own animating purpose. And so, yes, it's always bad for there to be partisanship in a place where free speech is supposed to be encouraged. But also ideologies will also clash. So let's see if at this moment, people who had the confidence that the wind was always at their back will now have to be more explicit and say, well, this is really what I stand for. And hopefully this moment helps clarify that.
Although, Michael, if I might follow up, suppose their ideology or their worldview is not open to dialogue and questioning, what then?
Well, you don't question them. It's just like if someone says, look, I'm a devout believer in this, and I'm going to present myself this way, and you're not ever going to convince me. that's okay. I don't think any credentialed teacher should have that kind of attitude, but you certainly expect to find that in the world. People have, varying opinions.
Right.
But I don't know. I don't want to be I don't want to be the one that says I question your patriotism in an academic setting. And I don't want to be the one that's pointing out teachers and saying, they're actually indoctrinating people against this country in K-12. But I think people should be realistic about, this is left, and left meaning Marxist, left meaning socialist, and that these are the animating papers. Just like with Giroux, we can say, okay, someone who invokes Paulo Freire, the pedagogy of the oppressed, really thinks that the classroom is the battleground, and he really thinks that the teacher should be an ideological leader. Well, that's to be expected. Okay. Mm-hmm. Just like if you're teaching history in Cuba, all right, you are only going to teach one kind of history because that's the way it is. But here in America, we can't have that ideological stringency coming from teachers.
Now, Eric, I want to pick up on a line that Michael just said. You're only going to teach one type of history. He was referencing Cuba. As we all know, we're currently in the middle of Black History Month. And there is somewhat of a latent debate in terms of whether or not we should continue to observe Black History Month now and going forward, or is Black History Month really American history? And so the argument is that on the one hand, yes, because Black history was excluded for so long from the classroom as a racial agenda. And on the other hand, the argument is, well, by creating a single month, you're perpetuating racial segregation in a sense in the classroom, that it should be part of American history 12 months out of the year. What are your thoughts on that? Should we continue to observe Black History Month or not? And if we do, is that ironically some type of a racialist agenda in the classroom?
Well, I mean, lately I've been thinking about this, especially when it comes to the Trump administration's executive orders, getting rid of certain things and things like that. And people are interpreting it as maybe we can't do Black history anymore, or maybe we can't have affinity groups or anything like that. I am of the opinion that I don't need society's permission to celebrate something. Like if I want to get together with my Black friends and celebrate Black history and have a Black history party, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to, oh, well, it's not on the calendar, so we can't do it.
Right.
No, I'm not. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to do that. And if I want an affinity group, I'm going to do that. Okay, it's not going to be funded by the federal government anymore, right? Okay, we can still do it, right? So I know this is a big and contentious issue, but I don't think it's as contentious as it seems to be. I think it's annoying symbolically. People seem to be saying they don't care about Black history or Black affinity or anything like that, but I don't care what they think.
Oh,
now,
I
didn't answer your question. Should we have Black History Month or not? And that is a hill I'm not willing to die on. If it sticks around, that's one thing. If it doesn't, that's also one thing. I lean towards it's all American history, and we should talk about it. But yeah, I'm not dying on that hill.
Michael, you and I have had some previous thoughts about this, and this is a natural way to continue that. I mean, what is the purpose and meaning of Black history today in the classroom?
Well, I think about the Black History Month was initiated in the days when people still were suffering the existentials of the Negro problem, which is, everybody thinks we're poor. I kind of think we're poor. I'm a little bit ashamed of being a Negro. Kind of the kind of cataclysmic thing that James Baldwin was going through when he first appeared on the scene. It's just like America is this horrible, hostile place, and we don't even know what a free Black person looks like. So I can see where the necessity for Black History Month was greater in those days than they are now. Now that we've had it for 50 years, I think there are good reasons and not so good reasons to look at Black history. The good reasons, obviously, are curiosity. If you're just curious, I didn't know that there was Black history. I don't know that there were Black soldiers on both sides, or why they fought, or other than I watched Denzel Washington in the Mass 54th movie Glory.
Right,
That's about
right.
all I know, right? So curiosity is always a good reason. I also, patriotic value. I mean, there's something to be proud of in the struggle of every American towards freedom. And it didn't all happen at a snap of the fingers or signing of a document. Different groups of people achieved freedom in different ways. This is what gave me against my negative against Juneteenth. I was like, well, people have been celebrating Juneteenth forever, and now, it's now officially, the administration says we're going to recognize Juneteenth and give you a holiday. Well, okay, that's good. There's a reason to celebrate that particular element of freedom, just as there are for new immigrants to this country who are experiencing Philadelphia freedom for the first time. And then, of course, wisdom. If you're studying history, there's no reason not to study Black history. If you want to get a comprehensive idea of what's going on in the world, then you have to get specific into things that happened in America among African Americans in various parts of time. And, they had different emphasis, political, educational, social. Then there are not so good reasons. And I think probably the worst reason is for racial competition. When we get into arguments like, well, it was a Black man who invented the light bulb, and Thomas Edison was oppressing Lewis Latimer. He was employing him like a slave, and
Of course, yeah.
that kind of stuff. And then, as much as people talk about self-esteem, that's just kind of a chauvinism, isn't it? I think so. So, get all puffed up about what somebody else who's not even related to you.
Exactly. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Right. And then the one that's annoying to me, I guess in the way that Eric, you get annoyed, is the marketing aspect of it. It's like, oh, well, it's like Secretary's Day, or it's like, it's not like secretaries don't contribute, but somebody declares a day and it's just an excuse to, go to Macy's and buy XYZ. The whole marketing aspect. I mean, that's kind of what's happened to President's Day too.
Yeah.
It's like it used to be we'd have celebrate this president because of what this president did. And now it's several presidents and then so now we have to put all the Blacks into a month.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
I have an idea, Michael, and it may or may not pan out. My idea is that the perspective on Black history is a factor of your generation. So, for example, if you're someone like me who was born in 1961 and literally lived through a portal in time from public school segregation to public school desegregation, and Dr. King was on this TV screen, it's going to have a different resonance than for, say, someone who's a teenager who lives in San Diego, California, for whom those images and times are just like black and white, distant images from a history book. And so I think that Black history, interestingly enough, may wane, not because it's less valuable ultimately, but just because that generation that knew it in their hearts and soul will be moving off of the page of life, and that a new generation coming of age will be more concerned about maybe other things, or maybe they'll conceive of Black history more as Kendrick Lamar and more as issues involving, what's her name? Simply Red, Sexy Red, I forget. But so, they may view it as more of that. So that's kind of my thought, is that Black history may be a factor of your perspective defined by your generation. But having said that, I want to return back to Eric again, because Eric, I was wondering, the topic of this panel is racial agendas in the classroom, racial agendas in the classroom. And I was thinking about my own childhood. For those who don't know, I pretty much had a very middle American childhood and upbringing. I was raised in a southern small town suburb. My junior high school was 3% Black. My high school was 8% Black. We were the New South. We were the first generation of kids that were educated together in a Southern community, a Southern town. And I cannot, for the life of me, remember any racial instruction or edicts from my teachers. Now, granted, my teachers were probably 95% white, 92, 98% white, but there was never a sense that race was something the teachers needed to have an agenda about. Even my Black teachers, there were a few, even my Black teachers were not about race. I remember, for example, my mathematics teacher in high school, Mrs. Cruz. Shout out to Mrs. Cruz. I was very much of a politician in high school. I didn't care very much for trigonometry or trigonometry 2 or calculus. And one day she said to me, Wink, this politics stuff is okay, but you gotta be serious about this mathematics in this class. And she was not cutting me any slack because of a shared race or whatever. She expected me to be concerned and do my work in math class. And so it occurred to me, and here's my question, Eric. Is it ever appropriate for there to be any kind of racial agenda from the head of the classroom if you're in junior or senior high school? And if it is ever appropriate, what are the unique circumstances? And you may think it's never appropriate, but what do you think?
Well, the unique circumstance would be, is this class about race? That's
for example, if it's like a class for minority groups in America, it's about race. Yeah.
Exactly. If it's chemistry, and the teacher's like, today we're going to do Black chemistry. I don't like that at all. And I mean, you laugh.
Underscore.
Yes. There are people out there with that kind of mindset.
Right.
But the skin lightener and hair straightener has already been invented.
What's that?
The skin lightener and the hair straightener have already been invented.
That's right. Right. They're behind the times. So,
what is the chemical composition of skin whitener or whatever?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Michael, do these teachers do they have any quote unquote self-awareness? Do they recognize how silly these ideas are? Black chemistry or even Black physics or whatever.
I have when I just got my first entry-level job at Xerox in Southern California, I still did some of the basic role modeling stuff. And we went over to some neighborhood schools and, I brought the computer and I said, this is the hard drive, this is the CPU. And I was really shocked at the kind of discipline the teacher had in this class. It was like, Mr. Bowen is here, shut up, and I think a lot of teachers, especially when they're teaching poor Black kids, they take license, which is, you better shut up and listen to what I'm teaching you now, or else you're going to end up like your miserable, lousy loser parents. You can feel that. I could feel that when I went into these classrooms. And so I can see where if you think you're doing right by Black children, I'm teaching you how to have some pride because you're nothing right now. Then I think they can get away with it. And I think that's what they've been doing over the past recent years. And it's not like in middle school, high school, they haven't heard about George Floyd. The subject comes up, teachers are going to be as politically correct in front of them, even more so than they would be at the cocktail parties. And we already know what they're going to say there.
Mm-hmm. That is a very good point, Michael, because we always have to keep in mind, and I return to this generational change in things. When I was in school, in the classroom, the major Black figures of note would have been Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who had been assassinated in '68. Or it might have been Andrew Young, who was really revered as a model of Black achievement, mayor of, I think, Atlanta and congressman from Atlanta. Mayor Henry L. Marsh III of Richmond, Virginia, who passed recently, was the first Black mayor of Richmond. And that was a big thing, although no one talked about it. It was just sort of in the ether, in the air. You saw stories about Mayor Marsh on TV, but it was never talked about or instructed from the head of the classroom. So it's true. I think we have to be mindful that the kids in the classrooms today have lived through unique historical markers in time, which will give teachers at the head of the classroom more room, if you will, to be politically correct or to instill racial agendas. But then, Eric, I guess that raises the question, what can be done if even good faith teachers in the classroom feel this need because of historical events to be politically correct? What can be done? Because they may not question whether or not they're engaged in and crossing the line into inappropriate racial agendas.
Well, if they're doing it because they think their students need to hear this so that they can be proud to be Black or something like that. I'm not in the classroom, so I don't see the dynamics of their interaction or things like that. But assuming, I'll make it personal, assuming that this person needs like some kind of permission to be proud to be Black or something like that, or has to be reminded of it. I mean, I would, as a student, I would have been like, I'm already proud to be Black. Teach me how to use a comma.
There you go. I like that.
That's what I'm here for.
Right. Right.
And a lot of people think that's exactly what teachers should be doing. They should be politicizing the classroom in that sense. No. I mean, if the students ask you for it, or if the students' parents ask you for it, that's one thing. You can have that conversation. Otherwise, do what you're there to teach.
Yeah. And it is very, Eric, to go on that point, I think it's very off-putting, particularly if you are otherwise a very self-confident, well-adjusted Black kid, and let's say a boarding school or a private school or a suburban middle-class school. I mean, there's nothing more disruptive, I think, to one's sense of self than to have someone in a position of authority make all kinds of assumptions about your sense of inner self-esteem. That's one of the things that I am so grateful for. And this will strike people as a little bit interesting. I'm so grateful that I grew up in the time and place I did, because let's be honest, your typical white faculty member in a Southern town in the 1970s, they didn't really care about your racial whatever. That was the last thing on their plate. And so in a way I benefited, right? Because I was treated like everyone else, because I was like everyone else in my humanity. In terms of Blackness, well, that was for me and Black Enterprise magazine at Grandma's house. That was me and church, the AME local church, right? So in a way, I feel so happy because I didn't have someone who may have been disconnected from the Black experience to make assumptions about me. What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I go back to my high school, I think I know that there was, in fact, a lot of outreach going on. When I think I was born the same year as you, but I skipped grades.
You're smart. You're so smart, Michael. Bow down.
No, I know. For example, I wanted to go to Palisades High School, which just had some of its buildings burned down, and they were busing Black kids from the city out to Palisades, and then my little brother and sister, they were bused out to the valley, 30 miles away from home.
Right.
So there was definitely an attitude in the air, which was kind of just the opposite of George Floyd. George Floyd, they says, okay, this horrible thing happened. Now we really got to get, political and talk about this all the time. We had Detroit burned down and people were like, okay, we're done. I'm tired of riots. I want to listen to Casey and the Sunshine Band sing Shake Your Booty. I want to have a bicentennial celebration. So by 1976, people were like, yeah, let's all get along together. Let's shake a hand, make a friend, ride the friendship train. Those were the songs of those days. And crossover was happening and it was real and people were enjoying it on all sides. And this now, everybody gets their own channel, their own week, their own version of history, their own lived experience in a movie of the week, and it's fragmented.
Yes.
And we've lost common purpose, and so that makes it okay for the DEI people to do their DEI thing, or the free area people to talk their thing, the Kennedys to do their thing. But we're going to get tired of all that divisiveness.
I love that idea, Michael. That's really insightful. The idea that, in part, what we're reaping is the fruit of fragmentation, of divisiveness, and the lack of a common purpose. I love that so much because it seems like there's a human reaction to that, which you experienced in the 1970s, that people just grew weary of the chaos and the division. Eric, does that suggest that beyond the current milieu that we're in lies almost a phoenix, almost a renaissance of what Michael knew in the 1970s? Can you foresee, for lack of a better word, a golden renaissance, a golden age in Black culture and consciousness, which embraces a common purpose over fragmented division? What do you think, if you look into your crystal ball?
Well, perhaps this is partly wishful thinking, but I think if there's going to be some kind of revolution or a phoenix moment for Black America, it's going to be one of self-reliance and individuality.
Talk to me. I've had the same thoughts.
I think when certain things go away, if they do, we will find ourselves here with just ourselves. So where are we going to get that pride if there's not an official Black History Month or an affinity group or something like that? We're going to still have that pride, but we're also going to still have ourselves. And maybe we'll start focusing on ourselves a little bit more, and that self-reliance, and realize the fact that a group of people is made up of individuals.
Yes.
And the strength of those individuals will turn into the strength of that group. We're not doing that right now. It's all about I'm Black, that's it. Not I'm Eric and I'm Black and all that's great, right?
Yeah.
That's not happening enough right now, but I think that might be ushered in coming years.
I love that.
And
Jennifer, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a good place for me to add a comment from the audience. So what does Black culture or the Black experience mean? We hear those words thrown out quite a bit. And Eric, you're talking about individuality. Wink, you were talking earlier about Black history. What does Black culture mean?
I would answer
Black experience.
I would answer that impossible question with a simple answer. And people have heard this before from me, but I think it gets to the heart of things. If there are, I can see Michael's eyes of recognition, if there are over 40 million Black Americans, there are over 40 million stories, experiences, and perspectives. So the best answer to that wonderful question, God, would probably be 40 million different possible answers, because it comes down to the individual, as Eric referenced earlier. I could define it in one way, Black culture, but that would be through my generation, through my generational eyes and perspective. Michael might define it in a different way. He might think more of literature, Black literature, and the power of Black poetry. Eric might be more enamored with the use of rhetoric, with the use of language as a way to understand Black culture. For me, Black enterprise, baby, Earl G. Graves. That's how I kind of came into the situation. But I do think every person would probably define Black culture in their own unique way. What do you think?
And you read my mind. I was thinking about African American rhetoric and and African American vernacular, things like that. When most people define a culture, they go to language or food or annual celebrations or things like that, and that kind of constitutes a culture. We can do that somewhat in America with African American vernacular and dishes and things like that. But I don't think that's salient enough for me anyway to say that there's this monolithic Black culture, right?
Yeah.
You may choose to be politically Black, as Nicole Hannah-Jones once said. You may choose to be incidentally Black, right? You may choose to be schizophrenically Black. One day you're incidental, and the next day you're all about it. You're Mr. Hotep.
You may choose to retire from Blackness for all we know.
Yes. There are people out there trying to transcend race, right? We know those people. So I'm with you, as is Free Black Thought, that there are 40 million Black people. There are 40 million different ways to be Black.
What do you think, Michael?
I was going to say there may be 40, 50 million Black individuals, but that means there's 10 million Black families. Okay. And I think the Black experience as an abstract concept means more when your family means less.
Oh, so that's deep. Expand upon that.
I'm saying that there are people who are out there trying to grab onto this, and if you're not, I don't mean to be insulting for people to whom this doesn't apply, but if you think you need to change your name to an African name, that's something implied by, well, that's a slave name that my father gave me, and I don't want that name. So to the extent that there's some shame that people have in their families or their upbringing, or the region of the country that they came from, they may want to escape their own bloodlines and hang their identity on this aspirational thing that they think Blackness should be. So there's always going to be a fragment of African Americans who are going for maybe, I can't feel Black unless I wear my dreads very long, right? And so, I think quite frankly that Black America is going to be more accepting of its own diversity. I think the Black people who voted for Trump, for example, are experiencing something new that they never experienced before, and that's real. I think there are still people who take a knee at football games, but they're going to be who they're going to be. And I honestly think that Black centrists, Black apolitical people, the Black left, and Black conservatives are going to say, this is my way of being Black. And I'm going to be forward in that unapologetically. Yeah. And that reflects an acceptance of individualism, but people will cluster in different Black ways going forward.
Wow, I love that answer. I love that answer.
Yeah, that was really insightful. On a follow-up, I've got another follow-up question from the audience on that. So, can anyone teach culture?
Yes, absolutely. I think of culture in two ways. Number one, if it's fashion and flavor, all good. But if it's multi-generational and it works outside of your country, then that's culture. All right. So like right now I am just loving this guy named Soejima, plays neo soul, acoustic guitar and electric guitar from Japan. Doesn't speak a word of English maybe, except to introduce people in the band. And I love that stuff. And I listen to a Lo-Fi Girl, which is this anime on YouTube. So I know that Black American jazz and Black American neo soul has transcended national boundaries over multiple generations. And I have an uncle from Senegal, married a French woman in Paris, and they were hanging out in the French Paris jazz scene. All right, and that was a big deal in the 40s and 50s. So there are generational things that the culture, that's a culture. When it's international, spreads over different languages, over multiple generations. Everything else is just kind of a fashion, right?
No, I agree with that 100%. Like if it's if it's going to be out of style in a year, that's not culture.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Mm.
It has to be, it has to have some lasting power. I agree with everything Michael just said.
Wow, interesting. I agree with that. I do. I mean, I think back upon my own experience, and the things that are multi-generational are things that, you know, some would label as quote unquote white, but they're not. They're just family values and attitudes. So I'm thinking things like enterprise, religion, education, industry or education, a sense of rootedness in the land, pietas. Those are all things social scientists might distill from generations of my family as culture. And yet, I don't think those things will be recognized in far left corners as Black culture. And I might kind of agree with that. They're just American cultural artifacts. They're just American cultural ways of being in the world. So it's interesting. I think, and one of the reasons I love this panel so much, by the way, Jen, is that you can see that every person brings their own unique lens and perspective to the question of understanding and defining Black culture. And to me, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
I think sadly, Jen, and this, I'm going to speculate a little bit. My speculation is that those Black Americans who come from atypical or uncommon or outlier, or let's even say middle American backgrounds, may be gun shy about being vocal about what they know because there's such a heavy lean in maybe the broader aggregate Black American culture and experience towards another side. And so I think sometimes American citizens may not get a good sense of the full flavor and range of Blackness. We hear those that are loudest. We hear those who further most the preferred narrative. We hear those who most seem like caricatures and stereotypes, but we don't necessarily hear those who are just living their lives and have over generations. That's my thought.
Yeah.
We've got another question going back to education in the classroom. What would be the 2 to 3 things you would like to see made to education today to move away from politicized classrooms? And, you know, we already are looking at national scores across the color line that are plummeting. So this isn't just a racial issue. But although arguably some racialist agendas may have been complicit in helping to.
I don't know how you would do it, but I would definitely try to box out reliance on AI and social media and iPads and iPhones for those who are young for as many years as you can. I mean, this is just me dreaming, but if you could box out those devices and tools from the young until they're, say, in high school, that might increase the attention span, the focus level in kids, and that might prompt a surge and an increase in test scores. Because my sense is you have to read well. And reading is not doom scrolling through your cell phone. Reading means to be able to have the attention span to read a book from cover to cover over a day or a week. And I think that devices undercut that, particularly when you're a young kid. That's my one thought, Jen.
Yeah, I'll beat my same dead drum, which is if you go to my site, one of my posts is 40 virtues. And Wink, you were getting at this talking about culture. I was saying, okay, you're getting close to virtues when you talk about enterprise and thrift. And you know, used to be there were the left side of the report card was about your character.
Right.
And I think we should go a little bit more with that. I mean, just because you're not learning long division in the 4th grade doesn't mean you're a dishonest kid. And I think if you're an honest kid, maybe you have bad work habits, but at least your honesty should be celebrated. That's a virtuous kind of thing. Like you didn't pay attention to trigonometry because you wanted to go another way.
I wanted to rule the
and
roost.
When you knew that about yourself, yeah. But I think kids now, you know, everybody is saying, well, the AI can do everything a human can do. Well, can a human make friends? AI is not making friends, right? And watching an AI or studying your iPhone is not really making friends. So we're not talking about social virtues as much as we should, and we're getting them mixed up with political ideological things, and we're not emphasizing this is an honest person, this is a trustworthy person, this is someone who defends the kid who's in trouble, right? This is someone who's generous, who shares. This person is fair. Those are the things that are valuable. And if public school is for socializing people in public, then they should do that. And so that should go on the report card about your character.
I like that. I like that.
I totally remember now. I feel so nostalgic. Those report cards where they they took the time.
Right.
Yeah, listen.
Yeah. That's right.
Now it's just GPA. It's like the tomato meter.
Right. Eric, what are your thoughts on the challenges to education? Do you remember those report cards though first, or are you too young?
I do not remember those report cards at all. I don't. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yet again, I'm the odd man out. I'm sorry.
That's right. That's right.
And I'll be even odder right now because there's a reason I went into higher ed because I don't know what to do with K through 12. And I'm afraid of K through 12. If I'm a bad person in this life and I die, I'm going to be perpetually a middle school teacher.
That's so funny.
So I have nothing for you. All I can say is that if we're being honest with ourselves, what we want are people who can function in everyday society when they grow up, right? And we're teaching these students, not just math or chemistry or something like that. We're also teaching how to go forth and be fulfilled and self-actualize in American society.
Yeah.
Right.
Or we're not teaching that, actually. That might be the problem.
Right. They're not teaching that.
Right.
And we know that they're making racial exceptions for the obstreperous students. Well, we can't suspend more than this many black male students in this, or else they're going to come down on us, no matter what the truth is on the ground.
Yes, and that's not doing any service to the students,
right?
Although they think it is, right?
Yeah,
that's true.
That's all I'll say.
I've got I'm going to change topics here because there's a great question from the audience again. So it says, there are groups linking Black America to cultures dominated by Hamas. Is there any concern that this conflation may encourage Black American children to emulate the violence of terror groups?
That's happening?
Dumasani kind of talked about this a little bit in our podcast, Wink. Do you remember his?
I do, vaguely. I think there definitely is a far left strain among some Black students in higher education at colleges, and I think there's a romanticism associated with Hamas. But I suspect that the audience member may be too fearful of the consequences of that. So, for example, I know someone who single-handedly sparked a walkout at a prominent university graduation in favor of Hamas. And the person would say the liberation of Palestine. But in any event, that person, I think, is just caught up in the political zeitgeist of the moment. I don't think that person would ever become violent or radicalized to the extent that they are pro-Hamas, if for nothing else. But like most college kids, the person is a careerist. And so they are aware that one day they will have to work on Wall Street or whatever. So you can only be so pro-Hamas if you're going to work on Wall Street.
Well, Wink, correct me if I don't want to put words in Dumasani's mouth. And I can link back to the podcast that we did with him. And unfortunately, he's not here with us today. But for Mike and Eric, maybe some feedback here. One of the things that he was saying is that, Russian propaganda throughout the ages kind of channeled into the Middle East putting this victimization narrative that then they laid on top of that, oh, Americans do it too. And they kind of tried to make that alignment with Black America in this, we're oppressed, you're oppressed, we're brothers, that kind of narrative is what something that.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I mean, because
go ahead.
I remember when the Black Panther movie came out, the young girl who was the scientific mind was calling somebody a colonizer. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, oh yeah, I've heard this rhetoric before. But again, I think people have to distinguish the Black left. I mean, the Black left is going to have to stand on its own. I don't think the Black left can scare the Black majority into obeisance. So there's always going to be Angela Davis and the Frankfurt School and that critical theory out there. And some people get jazzed about those politics. And there are people who, but I would say that most Black Muslims are more like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar than Fard Muhammad.
Yes, oh sorry, I was going to say Yasser Arafat, but just tease
me.
No,
I was thinking about somebody else, Steve Coakley, I think, and there was another guy in the '90s who was tried to make some alliance with Public Enemy, the group, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head though.
Professor Griff.
Well, Professor Griff. He was in the house.
Yes.
So, you said something, Mike, that I just wanted to touch on really briefly in the last 10 minutes that we have. The word colonization, that is one place when we see, okay, maybe DEI has had its Waterloo moment, as Eric said, but that word colonization, and maybe it's because of what's happening in the Middle East, but I think that's one of the new buzzwords that we're going to see that's kind of sliding in under the radar as DEI moves this way. Colonization is going to, and again, it ends up with this, it has the same neo-Marxist origin, right? But it's just another way to kind of slide some of these ideologies in is through this neo-Marxism. Colonization, decolonization, which I have seen not as we've seen DEI kind of move out. I've seen the rhetoric around colonization move up, but no one's kind of making the connection that they're actually very, very similar, or at least cousins, if not brothers, are the same.
Yeah. I mean, whenever I hear far right, I'm like, how far right? I mean, the British lost their empire, but before they lost their empire, they were very interested in anti-slavery, and they put sanctions on their whole empire, basically. But their empire slipped away from them. And then, my father was one of those ones who had Pan-Africanist dreams, and part of my family went over to West Africa, and we have them in family now. But the Pan-Africanism didn't work. Decolonization was basically a disinvestment, and it was kind of stand up and walk and go. And some of that has worked and some of it hasn't worked. But you can't just use that word blithely against, all of white people. Right. And then include Jews for that moment, Zionists for that moment. The history is too deep and complex to be reduced to that simple kind of thing.
I agree with that, Jen. In fact, I wonder why we don't, when people use the word decolonization and colonization, have people forgotten the history of the American Colonization Society back in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s? There were several thousands of Black Americans who, quote unquote, colonized Liberia. And once they were in Liberia, what did they do? They didn't act like angels and saints. They just replicated the same habits and values they had seen on Southern plantations, to the extent that the Native Africans in Liberia grew to develop great animus and hostility towards the Americano Liberians in Liberia. So I would love to have the Black colonizing experience in Liberia be part of the broader colonization discussion, because colonization comes in Black and white, British and American. It is true.
That's a mic drop statement, but we still have 5 minutes. So we have to do something else.
Well, wait, do you have one final mic drop question?
Oh, let's see if I have one final mic drop question. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I was having a conversation with a young writer the other day, and we were talking about wokeism. And the young writer sort of viewed the whole issue of wokeism as passe, quote unquote. Wokeism has been defeated. Wokeism is dead. And so the young writer no longer had an interest as much in these matters. My question to the panelists, and you may suspect it's premature, but my question would be, when the day comes when these ideas of dogmatism and slogan words and ideology, what will victory look like when these notions are truly and authentically defeated in the public square? What will victory, quote unquote, look like? I know what abolition looked like when slavery was ended in 1865, but what will the victory over dogma and slogan words in the classroom, what will that look like?
More civil discourse, perhaps
Okay.
a return of debate, as a competitive act, perhaps. There are schools that are giving scholarships for the debate team, like they do for the football team. Perhaps we'll see more of that. The polarization will decrease. The gap will become much more narrow. I'm just spitballing here right now.
Oh, sure.
This is also wishful thinking. I mean, I'm a rhetorician. Of course, it's going to be like civil discourse.
Right.
But I do think that that's a distinct possibility.
Yeah, I mean, to me, victory will look like an American classroom, middle school or high school, where if 10 hands go up, you're going to hear and anticipate 10 different opinions and viewpoints, and no one's going to be self-conscious about that. To me, that's victory in the classroom. What do you think, Michael?
I'm going to pick on Christopher Rufo.
Okay.
In the future, Christopher Rufo won't have to have such sharp elbows.
Oh.
He can expect to just speak like William F. Buckley, and he'll get his point across. And so the even social media will become less rabid than it is now. Because we'll just know, hey, look, if they're not going to behave like adults, we're not going to pay attention to them. And the era of, trolling will be over.
Wow. So what happens to X? What happens to TikTok?
they just feed the AIs.
Large language models, right? Just feed the beast.
I would like to. One of the things I'd like to see, which we didn't kind of get so much into the post DEI world, but like there are things I'm wary about. And Eric said, just don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. You can't just crash all of these programs, even though you want to move fast and break things. That's not necessarily the right thing if you want reform, because you're going to get unanticipated consequences. But I think some of the previously suppressed studies will come out, and I'd want to make a plug for Lee Jussim at Rutgers, who published something introducing animosity, how DEI pedagogy produces a hostile attribution bias. So people who listen to Kendi, who listen to Robin DiAngelo, they're going to see racism. They're hallucinating racism, right? And Coleman Hughes made a great statement that I saw about the snake problem. I don't know if you've heard about the snake problem.
No, tell me.
In India, the king said we had too many snakes, and he made a bounty on snakes, $2 for every dead snake. So you would think that cleaned up the snakes. No, people started breeding snakes, killing them, and bringing them to the king. So when you go anti-racism in the way that this was, you're putting a bounty on racists. So you find them everywhere, and you're not getting rid of it. You're just
breeding it, maybe. Even.
Yeah, you're breeding it. And so the problem is that you have to find a way to really influence people's long-term values rather than just throwing, $8 billion at Black Lives Matter. So this is a long fight. Civilization is always a long fight. So,
well, Mike, while you were talking, Lee Jussum showed up and says he's here. So
that's great.
Hey, Lee.
Lee has promised us a panel discussion around that paper on DEI. So, Lee, I'm going to hold you to that.
Yeah, I love those bar charts, man.
Well, I know that's we're out of time, so thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for our Liberalism Practice panel discussion. For those of you, Lee, who might have missed it showing up late, this will be living on IL Values at IL Values YouTube. So thank you again, and we'll see you all soon.
Yeah, thanks to everyone.
Thanks, Jen.
Yeah. This was a great conversation, a great way to model what conversation could be like in the classroom in a post-DEI world.
And you got to have jokes.
Got to have jokes.
That's humor for sure.
Right.
Take care, guys.
That's a pathway to joy and peace.
Bye, everyone.
All right.